Yeah. So what the fuck? I got absolutely crushed on basically all of my picks this week, and most of you probably did too. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10 on the Any Given Sunday meter, we're sitting at a solid 9 Pacinos here. That's what we're talking about. And to be honest, one of the wildest upsets of the weekend that made it so crazy in the first place was the Dallas Cowboys, who, at least in my opinion and a lot of other people's opinions, were inarguably a top 5 team in the league, somehow getting the absolute shit beat out of them by the Denver Broncos, who, I mean, let's be nice to Brandon Perna here, they're not exactly a powerhouse. Some are calling it a fluke, some are saying the Cowboys are massively overrated, some are saying the Broncos are massively underrated. And let's be honest, the truth is likely somewhere in between. So to help us understand what that truth is, or at least get us a little bit closer to understanding it, I charted every single snap of this game to see what happened to this Cowboys offense, and I also wanted to see what the Broncos defense did that was so special in order to slow Dallas down. First things first, I'm going to show you what Denver did schematically in their game plan going into this game, their main coverages they used, some blitzes they really liked, just kind of in general what their game plan was. And then I'm going to show you how that game plan affected Dak Prescott and why, I mean, let's be honest, he might have played the worst game of his entire career. There's a lot to go over here, so get comfy. It's a jam-packed episode. And with that being said, let's get into it. The Broncos' game plan against Dallas was shockingly simple. I went into this tape study expecting a lot of exotic looks, maybe some blitzes that Dallas hasn't seen this year, something or anything out of the ordinary, but no, it was all pretty basic stuff. And oddly enough, it mostly revolved around the one coverage that most people in the media swear that you can't play against Dallas, which is cover one, or man-to-man coverage across the board. In particular, they use two main variations of cover one, which are cover one cross or cover one hole in Vic Fangio's terminology. And then they also called another variation of cover one called cover one rat. And these two versions of cover one were the most common coverages called in the first 3 quarters of the game. And then by the fourth quarter, when everything was way out of hand, they switched to obviously mostly zone looks to kind of keep the ball in front of them. And at least most prominently to me, they called a lot of quarter, half zone looks in the fourth quarter in particular, which I find really, really interesting. For now though, let's first look at those two main man coverage calls that they relied on for most of this game, which again are called cover one rat and cover one hole. Cover one rat obviously means man coverage across the board and one deep safety in the post, and the two underneath defenders in the box, which are usually going to be linebackers, they'll do what's called a fiddle technique on the running back out of the backfield, where they bracket the running back, and then whichever direction the running back breaks on his route, the linebacker on that side of the field will then run with him. Meanwhile, the linebacker that doesn't run with that running back out of the backfield will stay in the short middle zone area of the field as a rat defender, hence the term cover one rat, and his job is to just look for shallow crosses and help out his corners on the outside that might be getting beat by those man breaker type routes. Overall, this is a very solid coverage with a lot of different applications, and it's likely going to be the most common type of man coverage you see across the NFL on a weekly basis. Now, cover one hole, or one cross, as a lot of coaches like to call this coverage, is similar to one rat, sort of, kind of, except that it typically starts from a 2 high safety shell pre-snap, not a 1 high safety shell, so it kind of looks like quarters coverage, but then as the ball is snapped, one of the safeties, depending on the direction of the call, will drop down to become what's known as a hole player over the intermediate middle of the field, while the other rolls deep to become a traditional deep post safety. That hole zone player's one job is to look for any crossing route from the passing strength of the formation and then pick it up, since he has much better positioning and leverage to cover that kind of route than the corner covering it would have. And then once he picks up that route, it's the job of the DB that was trailing it to drop off and become the new zone defender in the middle of the field. So in essence, it kind of looks like a zone coverage because there is a pass off of a route, but it's only that one zone defender in the hole in the middle of the field, and everyone else is in man coverage all the way. These were the two main man coverage variants that Denver employed in their game plan, and they were by far the most common coverages called in this game in the first 3 quarters, as I mentioned earlier. However, in that fourth quarter, when the game was completely out of hand, that's when we started to see more of this, which is quarter-half zone looks, and I find that really interesting because a lot of the coaches in the Fangio coaching tree, which are obviously Fangio himself, Sean Desai up in Chicago, Brandon Staley, they all really like to use quarter-half zone looks, but they all kind of deploy them slightly differently. Keep in mind that there are calls where the quarters part of the call is to the boundary side and the half field safety is to the field side, and there are calls where the quarters part is to the field and the deep half zone is to the boundary, but it just depends on a lot of different factors like personnel, alignment, game plan, all that kind of stuff. But just be aware that it can really go either way. In this specific instance, the field side safety is playing a deep half zone, and on the boundary side, the boundary corner and boundary safety are in a quarters look over CeeDee Lamb, which basically functions the same as a poach call in true quarters coverage where that safety has eyes on the number 3 to the field if he releases vertical. Because obviously you're not going to want a linebacker to run with potentially a very fast wide receiver deep down the field, so number 3 vertical is always going to be his guy. But if number 3 does not go vertical, he steps down to rob number 1 to the boundary and take away anything like a glance route or a dig or anything in that kind of realm. Also, it should be noted that the boundary side corner through all of that is going to be in mod coverage, also known as man on demand, so he's sticking in man on anything vertical from number 1 from outside leverage. On the field side, they're basically just playing cover 2 here, so the flat zone corner is going to collision the release from number 1's vertical, play it top down with eyes on the inside, and if either number 2 or number 3 release to the flat, he will pass off number 1's vertical to the deep half safety and then drive on that route to the flat instead. If there's no threat to the flat, he'll just keep syncing with that number 1 and play underneath the route because he knows he has help over the top. It's the same story with the nickel as well. He'll play top down on number 2 until about 12 to 15 yards of depth and then release him to the safeties. He's obviously trusting one of them to pick him up at that point. And then once he does that, he becomes a floater in the intermediate middle to rob things like dig routes on dagger concepts and other things like that. Now, you might be doing some math in your head and realizing that, wait a minute, this coverage seems super vulnerable to certain vertical offensive concepts that can overload that deep half safety with receivers because, I mean, let's be honest, everyone's just passing off everything to him all the time. And you're right, it is very vulnerable to stuff like that, but more on that later. I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself, but trust me, there is payoff there. Now, on this play in particular, they did not overload Justin Simmons deep down the field, and in fact, CD was the only vertical route in the whole concept, so he was able to easily range himself back over to the deep post area, and Dak had to leave this ball super skinny to avoid Simmons, so the corner was able to easily break it up because Simmons left no room over the middle for Dak to lead CD away from that corner's outside leverage. So overall, that was about all the Broncos did. It was mostly man coverage, some cover 3, some quarters in very long yardage situations, sprinkle in a few fire zone pressures, and then finally, it was those basic quarter half zone looks to close out the game. That was honestly pretty much all they did. So those few concepts were kind of the backbone of Fangio's game plan against a very potent Cowboys offense. And again, everything that they did was not that overly complicated, and they didn't really do anything fancy at all. Schematically speaking, it was pretty simple. But just because it is simple doesn't mean that it wasn't highly effective as well, which of course it was. So now let's take a look at how Dak Prescott responded to that game plan, and we'll see if we can pinpoint exactly what part of it made him struggle so much. First things first, I want to acknowledge that yes, there were a lot of factors at play here in Dak's performance. Tyron Smith was out, so Terrence Steele was kicked over to left tackle in his stead and was promptly manhandled by Jonathan Cooper, who you might recognize as one of my favorite edge rusher prospects from this year's draft class that I highlighted back in the spring, so it's nice to see him doing well at least. It should also be noted that Zeke was in and out of this game with some sort of aggravation in his knee, And the defense just could not get off the field either, so there was a constant pressure on Dak to do everything basically all by himself. And in the end, he just couldn't overcome all of those different hurdles on his own. Don't get me wrong though, it's not like Prescott didn't create any of that adversity for himself. He was far from blameless, and on the whole, despite all of the problems with the offensive line and the receivers and the injuries, I still think that his play individually was the main reason why Dallas lost this game. I'll give you a few examples. This is the fourth quarter interception that he threw that was really the backbreaker in this game. There was no coming back after this one. And ironically, it was not just the last snap that the Broncos ran cover one hole or cover one cross, but it was the last snap in man coverage, period, for the entire game. Once they picked off this pass, the game was basically over, so they just started playing zone on every snap after that. Here was Dak's fatal error on this play. Again, remember, it's cover one cross, so it presents pre-snap as a potential too high safety structure. The boundary side safety is going to walk down to that hole in the intermediate middle of the field with eyes on the passing strength of the offense, looking for a crossing route. The free safety is playing what's called a lean post technique, and he's midpointing between the number 1 and number 2 receiver because he doesn't need to worry about number 3, of course. And the boundary side corner is in man underneath on the shallow cross all the way. As the play develops, the whole zone player picks up the deep cross from the number 3, and the corner that was covering that number 3 drops off and now becomes a robber in the middle of the field. Unfortunately for Dak, I believe that he truly thought he was just getting cover 5 here, which is a 2 deep safety look with man coverage underneath, and I don't think that he knew that this was cover 1 cross or cover 1 hole because of the positioning of this field side safety is kind of ambiguous, so he just expected this deep crossing route from the number 3 to clear out everyone, and he thought that the dig to CeeDee Lamb behind that clear out would be there for him. Obviously, he was wrong, and he didn't see that corner become a robber in the middle of the play, and he threw that essentially game-ending interception as a result. Now, that misread was at least a little bit understandable because, again, this coverage is very crafty, and the nuances with which the Broncos play it can give a lot of quarterbacks fits, just ask Patrick Mahomes. But what is a lot less forgivable was all the instances in this game where I think Dak was just straight up not seeing the field. I don't have an explanation for it. It almost never happened over the last 2 seasons, but for whatever reason, the dude was just playing blind out there. I mean, I'm talking about easy reads that were missed, both pre-snap and post-snap. There was a switch fade versus one rat where Amari got a good rub and he had plenty of space, and Dak just didn't execute. There was another play where the Broncos just flat out busted against mesh, and Dak had the shallow cross but didn't set his feet, so he threw it in the dirt. There was another example where he straight up didn't see a deep over that was wide open versus one cross that honestly could have been a touchdown or at minimum a huge gain. That one, at least for me, was super frustrating. And I know that Kellen Moore was probably frustrated too because that wasn't even the only play he called that absolutely should have been a touchdown against the very basic coverages that Fangio was calling. One of my favorite calls from Kellen the entire day, ironically enough, is one that he ripped off of Sean McVay versus the Bears from back in week 1 against those same quarter half zone looks. Remember, Sean Desai, who's the Bears defensive coordinator, is a Vic Fangio disciple, so they use an extremely similar defense, so it's a very easy concept and play call to translate from one game to the next. Just like Sean McVay in week 1, Kellen Moore used the coverage rules of that call against the Broncos to set up a deep post with all of the space in the world to throw to, and Dak just, for whatever reason, did not or could not throw it. Yes, I understand that there was some pressure on the play and he kind of dropped his eyes when the rush got there and then had to reset himself. I understand all that, but I mean, come on, it's right there. Quite frankly, you could make a strong argument that this is the worst game Dak Prescott has ever played since he entered the NFL, which, at least for me, is a little bit encouraging because that means, statistically speaking, we're unlikely to ever see Dak play this poorly ever again. So there you have it. There were a lot of reasons why Dallas struggled in this game. We could talk about offensive line issues. We could talk about Zeke. We could talk about coaching or receivers dropping passes. Everything obviously contributed to this shitstorm, but When it comes down to it, the main problem obviously was Dak Prescott. And this is not me being a Dak hater, because this game came out of nowhere to me. He's been playing MVP caliber football for like a solid 2 seasons now. Like, even before he got hurt in 2020, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league this year as well. So this is not me shitting on Prescott. I think he's a top 5 quarterback. I really, really do. He's playing phenomenal football, except this game. So do I think that he's going to play this poorly again? Probably not. And do I think that the Broncos are somehow going to do this to every single quarterback they face ever since they traded Von Miller? Also probably not. I mean, at the end of the day, shit just kind of happens in the NFL. I mean, for God's sake, the Jags beat the Bills this week. This wasn't even the craziest upset of the day. So if you're a Cowboys fan, don't panic. And if you're a Broncos fan, enjoy it. I don't know. Are you guys tanking for a quarterback? Do you want to trade up for Kayvon Thibodeau? I don't really know what Broncos fans want at this point. I don't even think Broncos fans know what they want. Either way, you won? I don't know. Whatever. It's a long time till the draft. We'll figure that shit out later. Regardless, if you're a Cowboys fan, just don't panic. You're going to be fine. Now, if you made it this far, first of all, thank you for feeding the algorithm gods. And second of all, now you get to watch me cook delicious food. So I guess it's kind of a win-win for both of us. HelloFresh has been one of my longest running sponsors for a reason, and that's because they have a product that I really, really enjoy, because I really, really enjoy cooking. The one hard part about cooking, though, obviously, is spending all the time making grocery lists and then going to the store and buying ingredients and doing prep and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the cooking itself, which can sometimes take a while too, depending on what you're making. But with HelloFresh, I don't have to do any of that. I just select from one of their 50 different meal options every single week. They send me the ingredients for really, really good restaurant quality meals with fresh ingredients that came from the farm to your table within a week. So you don't really sacrifice any of the farm to table quality that you get from a local grocery store. But you're also spending less money. You're hurting the environment a lot less because they're only sending you the amount of food that you need for the meals that you're making. There's not a whole lot of food waste and overbuying, and obviously you're saving a lot of time not having to go to the grocery store as well. So it saves you really everything that you want in life. And by the way, if you're even a little bit intimidated by cooking, maybe you're not super experienced with it, the recipe cards are very easy to follow, and even my wife, who could probably burn cereal, has managed to cook a meal from HelloFresh and not totally kill us. So you'll be fine. Trust me, it's very easy to learn to cook when you're using HelloFresh instructions. If you're interested in trying out HelloFresh for yourself, you can go to HelloFresh.com and use promo code FilmRoom14 for up to 14 free meals, plus 3 free gifts across 5 HelloFresh boxes, plus free shipping as well. Again, that is promo code FilmRoom14, and that will get you 14 free meals, plus 3 free gifts across 5 HelloFresh boxes, plus free shipping. Again, thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring and helping to make this show possible. And with that being said, I'll see you guys next week.